This is Deborah Zaritsky for Bio 520, Grand Canyon University. Today is June the 16th, 2020 for Dr. Harakos. Today I'm going to be talking about the tubular maximum, also known as the transport maximum, and the renal threshold. Renal meaning kidneys. So we've got two kidneys. And if we take a bilateral section of the kidney, we're going to see what looks almost like a maze of these microscopic structures known as nephrons. We're also going to see a lot of capillaries going through here and our larger blood vessels, our afferent, efferent arterioles, along with our veins. We have our ureter that's going to be connected to our urethra and then to our bladder. So looking a little closer at the anatomy, we have, so the kidney is the largest one. Again, we have two. And then, so we're kind of highlighting this area here to say that if we were to magnify this, one of these, that would be a nephron, and it would look a little bit like this. So we know our kidneys as being part of our excretory system along with our endocrine system when we look at our adrenal glands, but primarily the kidneys' function is to produce urine. So we're going to be excreting or taking out some materials that we don't need, and we're going to be absorbing or reabsorbing some organic and inorganic molecules that we do need. So again, the nephron, that's going to be our smallest yet largest amount because they're in such abundance, and that's going to, again, be responsible for forming our urine. We have the glomerulus. It's always difficult for me to pronounce, glomerulus. And that's going to be filled with our capillaries. That's going to be exchanging that carbon dioxide and oxygen for us, along with filtering any solutes and water. So those solutes can be electrolytes, and again, the calcium phosphates as our inorganic compounds, and amino acids, glucose, and sodium as some of our organic compounds. So then we have these guys. These are called the tubules, and there's going to be two tubules that I'm going to talk about here momentarily. That's going to be the proximal and the distal. So you can see that as our urine is going to be produced, it's going to go through this little maze kind of thing here, and it's got many different curves to go through, and then finally out through the ureter. So according to Sherwood, the glomerulus, filtration is that's going to be the filtration of a protein-free plasma from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule. So the Bowman's capsule is going to be right in the middle here. And we also have the tubular reabsorption, and that's going to be the selective movement of filtered substances from the tubular lumen. The lumen is going to be lining the inside of the tubules into the peritubular capillaries, and those are the capillaries we kind of mentioned here that are going to be within that. And the tubular secretion, so these tubes are also producing a kind of a substance. So that's going to be some selective movement of the non-filtered substances from the peritubular capillaries into the tubular lumen. So as mentioned, we have three main molecules or substances, organic substances that are going to be processed. Now, these are going to be attaching to particular receptors. So those receptors or carriers are very specific for the type of molecule. So again, according to Sherwood, all actively reabsorbed substances within the plasma membrane carriers are going to be transferred, and they're going to be getting transferred across the membrane against their concentration gradient. So each carrier is specific for the type of substance that it can transport. And because these molecules normally are completely reabsorbed into the blood by energy and sodium dependent mechanisms located within the proximal tubule, which is going to be right here. So none of these nutrients are usually excreted in the urine, and that the proximal tubule is going to protect against their loss. So amino acids and glucose are going to be carried by these secondary active transport carriers. But what's interesting is that glucose has its very own transporter. But then you have the sodium and glucose co-transporters, also known as the SGLT, within the proximal tubule lumen, that can also allow the glucose or the sodium to get reabsorbed. So the glucose can get reabsorbed for up to 375 milligrams of glucose per minute. This is going to be dependent on our plasma concentration. And we know that the plasma glucose levels must be greater than 300 milligrams per 100 ml. Again, that's 300 milligrams per 100 ml before these carriers that I had mentioned are no longer going to be able to carry these substances. So the tubular maximum is going to be known as in this case, glucose. When it overflows and we can no longer carry it across that plasma membrane, then it's going to get excreted through the urine. And this is going to be known as glucosuria. So we can see here that, again, the plasma concentration is directly related to how much materials are going to be able to get carried. So let's say we do have this glucose and it's getting filtered, but it has now met that overflow. We can't carry anymore or reabsorb anymore, and therefore it's going to go ahead and get excreted out of the urine. So glucose is not controlled by the kidneys, it's controlled by endocrine systems and the liver, but phosphate is controlled by the kidneys. We know that within diabetes, one of the signs there is showing that glucose in the urine, as there is an abundance that may be insulin resistant. And again, there's just such an abundance that we have that overflow into the urine. Not all nephrons have the same tubular maximum. So some reach renal thresholds while others don't. So what is a renal threshold? Well, a renal threshold is when we're actually going to see that glucosuria. So we're going to see that glucose within the urine, and that's a clear sign that we have that overabundance. The renal thresholds for the inorganic ions are equal within the plasma concentrations. So we need whatever the calcium and phosphate, whatever we can't hold, it's going to go ahead and get excreted automatically. So according to Sherwood, our renal thresholds for inorganic ions like phosphate and calcium are equal to plasma concentrations, as I mentioned, and therefore would not need to wait to see what would be excreted. So that can get reabsorbed up to the normal plasma concentration, we're at the phosphate, and no more. And the excess ingested phosphate or calcium is quickly spilled so that we are reaching normal levels. So this is what our renal threshold graph would look like. So we have that 300 milligrams per minute. And then we're going to see that glucose getting out into the urine. So on the average, that tubular maximum is at a 375 milligram per minute. And we have what's called a glomerulus excuse me, filtration rate of 125 mLs per minute. So the renal threshold for glucose is again 300 milligrams per 100 ml, and in hyperglycemia, when we have too high of blood sugar, the kidneys are going to play a role by reabsorbing any excess glucose, ultimately contributing to chronic hyperglycemia, which in turn contributes to chronic glycemic burden and the risk of microvascular consequences. And that is by Trippett. So Triplett, understanding the kidney's role in blood glucose regulation. And what I find very interesting, going back to the beginning here, is that when we have diabetic patients that do not manage their diabetes, they could possibly go into renal failure because the uptake is going to go ahead and damage that kidney. So they have to go through a process known as dialysis, where we're going to go ahead and clean the blood of that excess glucose, just because we no longer have that. So just living with one kidney, and one kidney can allow that excretory system to prosper, in other words, is quite amazing to me. Thank you so much.